with us next week. And we can get back into our therapy sessions where, we express ourselves and we heal each other. So tonight, as we approach the final days of Black History Month, and let's make no mistake about it, Black History Month does not end on the 28th. Black history is an evolutionary cycle that goes on goes back eons and will continue for eons. I know February is the shortest month in the year, but I'm not going to complain. I understand the reasoning behind the choice of February. And the fact that I was born in February also is an incentive for me to be quite happy with that choice. But tonight I come on with a question, and this is a simple question. What are you doing for Black history? Each year, Black people of color, spend billions of dollars for holidays like Thanksgiving. For Christmas, we spend exorbitantly buying gifts. I mean, if you think about it, Christmas is supposed to be the birth of Jesus Christ. Yet we give each other gifts and we put ourselves in debt giving gifts when it's not our birthday. Here we are, Black History Month, and within that month is Valentine's Day, a made-up holiday, and we're going to spend hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars on things like flowers and candy. And fellas, realistically, that may be the only time you acknowledge the woman you love, the woman who's there for you, the woman who stands beside you and is their ride or die. You may not think about bringing flowers and candy till next year on February 14th. Fellas, that's not the idea. If you love that woman, show her every day how much you appreciate her, how much she brings to your life. You have a good woman, brother, hold on to it. Now, when I ask about what you're doing for Black History Month, Black History Month is a time of reflection. We should be thinking about our ancestors, their accomplishments, their struggles, their achievements, and all that goes into making us who we are. We carry some very powerful DNA, even though it is not something that is talked about enough. This may be the time to start that conversation with your friends, your children, your neighbors, talking about the meaning of blackness, our accomplishments, all the achievements, and where we still have yet to go. There's a long road ahead, but this is a time when we can begin to reflect and begin to strategize moving forward, because we indeed have a long way to go. And I was watching a commercial just the other day, and there's a candidate, I believe his name is Smith, who's running for governor here in Pennsylvania. And in his commercial, it comes on with school children and the label racist. The commercial goes on to say that all of these children, there's a number of children, he says they're all racist based on critical race theory. Now, I don't want to get too far away from Black History Month, but I guess it all ties in. For those who are confused, and clearly this gentleman is very much confused, critical race theory has never been a curriculum. It has never been taught in any schools in the United States. For those who do not know, and if anybody knows this candidate, have them call up the show or come on the show and let's have a debate. Because if you understood what critical race theory was or is, you would know that it's not a curriculum and no one is trying to force this into the schools. Critical race theory, what it was or what it was designed to be, was a study where a group of legal professionals were looking at the disparities in the criminal justice system. Again, that is not a curriculum. It is not a course of study. It is not something that someone is trying to teach innocent children. That is not what critical race theory is about. Nor in any of the literature regarding critical race theory do they mention people in general being racist. Of course, the media has, of course, confused and muddied the argument so that people are under the belief that there is some radical curriculum that is going to teach their children about or convince them that they're racist. This candidate, Mr. Smith, goes on to say that we need to teach about the greatness of America. Well, I think that in life there's good and bad. I think that if you're going to tell the story, tell the whole story. And I think that's one of the problems that we're having as it relates to Black History Month. One thing that we, as Black people, have never been able to adequately do, and that's tell our own story. Our story is told for us by those who may not have our best interest at heart. So our struggle, well, for the most part, it begins when the first ship bearing a cargo of Africans arrived into the Western Hemisphere. Our history goes back millions of years before that. In fact, there is no intelligent person who would argue that life did not begin on the continent of Africa. And from there spread out across the entire globe. But indeed, life started on the continent of Africa with people of a darker hue. Yet, in America, our history is condensed, it is abridged, it is edited. I mean, in fact, we are straight up lied to. So much of what we have accomplished throughout history has been, for lack of a better term, whitewashed. And that is something that we need to be aware of. We need to share this with our children so that they can share it with their children, and we can begin a new legacy and break this old one that has kept us in a state of perpetual, I guess slavery would be probably the best way to describe it. You know, I guess the best way to keep a person a slave is to convince them that they're free. So if you take a person and you put them in jail for 10, 20, 30 years, even though you placed them on parole, psychologically the bars are still there. And if you take an entire people, you put them on plantations for 400 years, and you deny them access to their history, their culture, their religion, even though the trappings of the plantation have been removed, that person still has the plantation mentality. And because of that, we place a little more effort, or a lot more effort and energy into things like Christmas, things like New Year's parties, things like Valentine's Day, than Black History Month. And, you know, if you are a TV watcher, basically what we get is the same old, I guess, programming year in and year out. We talk a lot about Dr. King, a lot about Malcolm, and a few others. There are so many people that we don't acknowledge. You know, and it is so important to acknowledge your ancestors. In America, we're told, well, that's something that's practiced in Africa, and that's taboo in this country. You know, we're taught that as religious people, which is what we've been made into, that we should not practice those old customs, that it is wrong. Yet in America, which is a Judeo-Christian society, how many structures, buildings, bridges, tunnels are named after Washington? What about Lincoln or Jefferson? Isn't that a form of ancestral worship when you create monuments to people who are long since departed? That is acceptable. But for us to just acknowledge our ancestors and what they've done, all of a sudden it becomes, I guess, sacrilegious would be the best way to put it. Well, I just think that in this time, in this month, we really need to reflect on our ancestors and where we are as a group, as a people, and how far we have to go. And before coming on air, TP, who's in the studio with me, we were just talking about this trial down in Georgia. I guess everybody knows or should know that the father and son and their friend, Roddy, I can't remember his last name, but they have been convicted of murdering.
Once again. That's right.
Once again, have been convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. They're already facing life sentence on state charges, and now they've been convicted of federal charges, which, it doesn't really change the outcome of anything. These guys were going to spend the rest of their life in jail. I think their argument was where they were going to be confined.
Yep.
I think they wanted to be in a federal prison, which I guess they felt much safer than going to the state prison, where they might have to encounter some of the black people that they apparently hate so much. But I guess in this time, when we think about Ahmaud Arbery, so many others that are no longer with us, I guess the question is, what made these three men think that it was okay to hunt this young man down, to kill this young man in cold blood?
Trumpism.
That may be part of it, but it's much deeper. When you think about it, they said that they saw him at this home that was under construction. And yes, there were some construction material there, but nothing small enough for him to put in his pockets. We're talking sheetrock, and other building materials. When he left, it was clear he didn't have anything in his hands. They chased this guy, this young man, Ahmaud Arbery, for a total of about 5 minutes before they cornered him. In that time, did anybody stop to think that he has nothing in his hands? Is it possible that he didn't take anything? Did anybody stop to say, why are we chasing this young man? That's the deeper part of it. Nobody stopped to think. And when they caught him, clearly he has nothing in his hands. There's no weapon. Nothing that would indicate he took anything. Why was there a need to fire a shot?
Trophy hunting.
That is something that we have had to deal with throughout our sojourn in America, the trophy hunt. And I think we need to be aware that that hunt is still on. And yes, I don't want to be the bearer of total bad news, because I think there's a lot of positive things that are happening in this country. I think that if you look at the way in America, the political system is structured now, you find more people of color in Washington. You find a lot more women becoming involved in the political process. This country is changing. It's doing so in fits and starts, like with critical race theory. We don't want to teach it, but at the same time, it's being played up right in front of us. You know, just a few short weeks back, ABC was showing something called the Women of the Movement. And they showed the tragic assassination of Emmett Till. You know, I was familiar with Emmett Till from seeing the story in Jet magazine when I was just a child. But there was so much more to the story that I didn't know. I didn't know until watching the story that his father, Louis Till, was killed by the same military that he chose to serve in World War II. You know, there was so much about what Mrs. Till had to go through just to get a proper burial for her son. So even though we don't want to teach it in the classroom, it's on television. Even though we don't want our children exposed to what some might consider racist material, well, what this actually is American history. While American history has some proud moments, American history also has some not so proud moments. And when people talk about what is American, well, we have to keep in mind that slavery was American. Systematic racism and oppression was American. Anti-Semitism was American. Misogyny and xenophobia also, unfortunately, American traits. So, as I said, it is a lot of good, but if you're going to deal with the good, you have to also talk about the bad. And again, this is not what CRT focuses on. So if anybody has access to this candidate, please have him call me or call the station, and we can debate this. But you know, there's no basis for his allegations or assertions. You know, this is something that the media has run with, and all it is doing is creating fear amongst people who think that their children are going to be unduly called racist or labeled as racist. Well, the fact of the matter is, if there is to be a curriculum that focuses on the struggle and I guess the reality and the life of Black people in this country, if we're going to tell the truth, unfortunately, your children are going to be exposed to what actually happened. You know, and I saw something on Facebook where people said, well, you know, they don't want to teach their children about Ruby Bridges being blocked from entering the school and all she had to go to just to become educated in America. Well, you know, what is done in darkness will eventually come to light. And this is finally seeing the light of day. And this is something that this time we really need to focus on and make our children and our children's children and generations to come aware. This is part of our generational wealth, our knowledge, and our understanding of who we are and where we have to go. So for Black History Month, this should be a time of reflection for each family. And, you know, I think it is something that we really need to engage our youth in. You know, working in my current profession, I come in contact with a lot of young people, and it seems as if there's a disconnect. The things that we knew, my generation knew instinctively, young people don't seem to know, at least not this younger generation. You know, I was told that I could not enter a room without speaking. Well, I noticed that these young people walk up, they won't even speak to one another. And they certainly don't speak to adults. It's like, you know, they kind of avert their eyes when they see you coming. I think that is part of the fact that we don't socialize the way we used to. Growing up in Brooklyn, we spent our time running up and down the street, you know, developing social ties, friends, some friends you had for life. And now these young people are spending their times most of their time, video games, TikTok, all these things that are, I guess, activities that you can do alone instead of forming ties with others. And I know we're kind of getting off the topic, but I guess it is also part of our upbringing. And that, I guess those the traditions that were part of who we are, we've gotten away from that. And it is reflective in our young people. So I just think that we need to engage young people in this time, in this Black History Month, and let them know all the history share it with them. Hopefully it'll spark some interest and they will want to know more. I know it definitely did for me. Once I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I was hooked. And, it opened up a whole new world to me, new possibilities. And I began to understand that there was so much more to the life of Black men and women than just what happened when the ships docked. So I guess TP and I just kind of talk a little bit and shoot a little bit back and forth about this month and what it means to us and what it means to you. So for those folks who desire to call in, the number here is 888-304-4401. Again, 888-304-4401. Call us and tell us how you are spending Black History Month, what it is that you're doing to honor the ancestors, what you're doing to enlighten this next generation, because that is so important. Just as the chain is broken, we need to reestablish those ties. We need to mend that chain. And the only way we can do that is for us to acknowledge who we were, who we are now, and moving forward. So, TP.
Yes, sir.
How do you spend Black History Month?
Well, I try to spend Black History Month educating people all month long, which I do all year long, but most especially Black History Month, because you can openly speak about Black history and people not look down upon you or trying to shut you down in public places or anywhere else. Because as I travel all over New Jersey, into different schools, all types of schools, yeshivas, public schools, private schools, Catholic schools, everybody got something about Black history on the walls. And I find that amazing. And I try my best to enlighten people, especially when it comes to Malcolm X. Most people have such a misunderstanding of Malcolm X, where he came from and what his point of view was and when his point of view changed,
Yeah. I was watching something the other day. They were talking about the men who were finally exonerated for the killing of Brother Malcolm. And sadly, only one of those brothers lived long enough to be exonerated. And there's so much about Brother Malcolm's story you brought out that we do not know. Malcolm is such an interesting individual in the fact that, Malcolm is kind of like the caterpillar that cocoons up and comes out as something completely different. Mm-hmm. Malcolm was a brilliant student. And one teacher told him, Malcolm had a desire to be a lawyer. And one teacher told Malcolm, oh, no, Malcolm, no. My people, meaning Caucasians, would never hire you to represent them. And your people wouldn't either. So you should probably pursue something like carpentry, some menial task, something that where you work with your hands and not using your brain. And of course, that has such a negative effect on a young, impressionable Malcolm that he began to rebel to the point where he was in prison for about 6 years. But in that time, Malcolm underwent a complete, not even a 180, a 360. And he emerged from jail. You know, Malcolm Little died in the prison in Massachusetts. What survived was Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. And that was our knight in shining armor that took on America, that took on racism, that took on prejudice, that took on hatred, and who stood up to it, and who died representing us as Black people and what he truly believed in. So Malcolm was a very interesting brother. And there were so many others that we don't even talk about. You know, if we were to take and just compile all of the Black people in this country that have contributed to this nation in, I mean, momentous ways, I mean, the list would go on for years. You know, because there is so much that we have given to this country, blood, sweat, tears, you know, we've given to this country. And yet, unfortunately, we're not getting much back. And I think what's worse is we're not really asking for anything. You know, now, and while we're talking about asking, you know, in 2021, we had the 2020, we had the presidential election. You know, I guess half the country, a little more than half, apparently was tired of Trump. Well, for Black people in this country, we overwhelmingly went for Biden, which is something that we've done for probably the past 60 years. We are overwhelmingly Democratic, considered liberal, when in fact, Black people are some of the most conservative people on the planet. But what do we ask of the Democratic Party? What was asked of Joe Biden? What were our expectations? So now, Biden is in his second year as president. And for the vast majority of Black people across this country, what has changed? How have your lives improved? You know, if you think about it, just the pandemic alone, it disproportionately affected people of color or people. In terms of the economy, Black wealth continues to slide. I think the last statistic, for every dollar a Black family makes, I think a white or Caucasian family makes $10 or $20. That has not changed under Trump, nor has it changed under Biden. It didn't even change under Obama. So what is it that we are expecting from our government? Are we expecting equal justice? Is that what happened in the case of Kim Potter, who killed a young man and received a 2-year sentence? Would that be considered equal under the law? If it had been the other way around, this young man shot and killed Kim Potter, would he be looking at a 2-year sentence?
25 to life.
Or the lethal injection? But there's another officer out in Minnesota. I believe he was from, I think it was Ethiopia. He accidentally shot and killed a Caucasian woman. Now, if an officer reasonably believes a person is armed and that person is about to use deadly physical force against he or another, that officer is justified in discharging his weapon. In this case, this officer was responding to a call, he and his partner. Well, this woman came up to the window, I guess, frightened the officer. The officer drew his weapon and fired. Sadly, this woman was killed. Well, I think that officer was serving a 12.5-year sentence. Whereas he could be, in light of the totality of the circumstances, his actions could be considered justified. Well, Minnesota didn't see it that way. Kim Potter, on the other hand, claimed she did not recognize her duty weapon from her taser. Now, TP and I were talking about this. Having been a police officer for 20 years, I know that your weapon is on your dominant side. So in other words, if you are a right-handed officer, your weapon is on your right hand. Your taser would be on the opposite side of your body so that there is no confusion as to what you are doing. As a trained, experienced officer, you know the difference between a taser and a handgun. They do not feel the same. They do not look the same. A handgun, you can draw and fire. A taser, you have to activate. So to say that this was just a simple mistake, no. Simple mistakes are, when you add a 0 instead of a 1. When you take someone's life, that is much more than a mistake. That is negligence. That is willfully killing someone. And that's what happened in the case with Kim Potter. But she's only looking at 2 years. And from what I understand, she may not serve the entire 2 years. Some of that may be supervised release, where she might wear something like an ankle monitor. So, these are the conversations we need to have, because while there is some improvement, we still have to be concerned about interaction with law enforcement. Now, I'm not saying all law enforcement is bad, but I certainly will not say all law enforcement is good. When you come to a police department, you come with certain prejudices, certain biases. These things, they're not necessarily taught at the academy. In fact, they're not. These are things that you bring with you. These are things that were discussed in your family. These are things that society implies. These are the things you bring to the academy. So if you have certain biases, certain fears, when you hit the streets, that's what's going to be reflected in how you conduct yourself as it relates to certain individuals. So, we need to make our sons and our daughters aware. And it is so vitally important that we understand what our rights are. And that's something that I think we need to dedicate an entire show to, because again, I was a police officer for 20 years. And so often people want to explain away the situation to the officer, when in reality, you have the right to remain silent. Use it. Don't say anything. A lot of times, the only information they have on you is what you give them. So if you don't say anything, there's really no evidence. But for those folks that will continue to talk and try to explain, well, all you're doing is digging yourself a deeper hole. And a lot of times, and look, these are some of the tricks of the trade. You say, well, look, if you talk to me now, I can kind of help you out a little bit. Let's be realistic. Cops are not customer service. Their job is not to help you. They're not going to help you to find the best sales. Their job is to put you in jail. Simple as that. And if you think that way, you will be less inclined to share information with law enforcement. Good. Yeah, so, but that's something we need to devote an entire show to understanding our rights in this country. And, you know, we need to have these conversations with our sons and daughters, because what happens when they encounter the police? Now, again, I'm not going to say that all law enforcement is bad. Yet, again, I will make it clear, not all law enforcement is good. And it only takes one interaction with an officer to change your whole perspective on policing. All it takes is to get that one officer who has those implicit biases. In the case of Ahmaud Arbery, the two McMichaels and their friend, well, the FBI investigated and looked into their social media and found out some of the things they were saying about Black people. It's no surprise, in light of what we've now discovered, that they hunted down Ahmaud Arbery. They didn't see him as a human being, didn't see him as a young man who just simply curious about new construction. Some of the officers you may encounter may have that same sort of mentality. So it's important that we talk to our sons and daughters how to interact with the police, what to say, how to say it, what your rights are, what you can do, what you cannot. And there's just one thing I like to say before we run out of time. When you are taken into custody and an officer wants to question you, first question you should ask is, am I under arrest? If you are not under arrest, you do not have to stay in an interrogation room. You can get up at any point and walk out. If they prevent you from doing that, simply say, I want a lawyer. According to the Constitution and to legal procedure, the questioning has to stop. Once you request a lawyer, they have to cease questioning you. But for the most part, people don't pay attention when your rights are being read to you, because a lot of times you're too afraid, too shook up. According to the Constitution or to the Supreme Court, police stations are inherently biased. So that when you're in a police station, of course you're afraid. You're surrounded by people you don't know, people you do not have the best relationship with. So we're going to have this discussion. We're going to devote the time to talk about your rights. But I just wanted to, this week, just talk about reflecting on Black History Month. And again, what are you doing for Black History Month? So that's our time tonight. Hopefully next week, we will be back with Romane, and we'll have another therapy session with Ron and Romane, Reason for Reason. Good night, folks.